Greetings, everyone. I want to again welcome you all to this homegrown collaboration with the Clark Fox Policy Institute, really focused on Black males' personal safety. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining in this conversation. For many of you who've been connecting and working with us, and we've been working with you, this is just a continuation and an expansion on a very important topic to recenter the discussion really more on these Black males, not necessarily focus on the idea of how can St. Louis be protected from Black males, which is where the conversation has been centered, to one centered in how you can ensure the personal safety of Black males, which we think is the most important question to be asked. So, but thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Mike, who's going to run through the agenda, and then I will get into framing today's conversation a little bit more. Mike?
And so before Dr. Joe, or after Dr. Joe rather, frames the conversation, we will have a panel of whom I'll introduce and give a brief bios of three individuals who will be talking about their experience with personal safety from three different perspectives. And so I'll introduce Jamar, Mike, and Jonathan at that appointed time. And then we will hear from Sergeant Kevin Bitley, who will represent on behalf the St. Louis Police Department, and after which we will hear from the Dr. Robert Motley, who will be talking about his research in this area before he leaves us at WashU and heads off to Boston University to further his education endeavors. After of which we will have a 10-minute break. And so we'll have a 10-minute break to rest and rejuvenize before coming back with the breakout sessions. And so, panel, as I introduce you, we are very strict about time. So I'll give you the 5-minute notification as well as the 2-minute notification. So we want to leave as much time as we absolutely can for the breakout sessions and for you all to lead those. And so, without further ado, we'll turn it back over to Dr. Joe. Thank you again for joining us this morning.
And this event is in a combination of collaboration with other events taking place this week called Black Male Week. We want to highlight that, again, it's an attempt to start Black History Month, focus on one of the most vulnerable populations, but one of great resiliency over the many centuries, and that's Black males in America. But we wanted to point our attention every year, if we can start this tradition of really highlighting not only the work that we're doing, but other work that's happening that we're part of regarding the upcoming conferences. Mike, can you give them a little detail?
So Black Male Week, we are partnering with the K-12 group who will be hosting a conference Wednesday through Friday, and you can find that information on our website or our Facebook page. And they will be focusing on the K-12 realm. So from kindergarten to 12th grade, they will be hosting their conference from Wednesday to Friday, and then the conference will conclude on Saturday with the Higher Education Consortium. And this is a conglomerate of educational institutions in the St. Louis area who seek to support the efforts of Black males. And so this will be a conference that's been going for 3 years now, where we seek to support all Black males within the St. Louis region. So we stretch as far as from SIU Edwardsville all the way to Webster University or Maryville University. And so that conference will be free. And so if you're interested in joining us on Saturday morning for that conference, we will have a panel discussion and other interesting topics as relates to the collegiate efforts of Black males within this region.
So thank you very much, Michael. So the Regional Consortium of Higher Education Initiatives for Black Male College Success, again, we're happy to be a part of that and help to grow that, as well as the Black Males in Education organization. So again, there's a lot for you to center your thoughts on related to Black males this week. Please, we hope that you will find time, if you can, to participate, to contribute, and to take from it the information and the strategies and the discussions that will be afforded to us this week. Again, my name is Dr. Sean Joe. I am the Benjamin E. Youngdahl Professor here of Social Development here at the Brown School, and the founding director for the Race and Opportunity Lab, and the principal director of HomeGrown StL. So HomeGrown StL, born out of many experiences I've had over the many decades, but I came to St. Louis centered on the idea that there was enough happening in St. Louis that I wanted to be a part of to really focus on a population level strategy. Do something no other region has ever done before, which is to really focus on one population. And for me, that priority was Black males. And I met a lot of community leaders that said St. Louis is large enough, but small enough to change and large enough to matter. So out of that experience was born HomeGrown StL, the gathering of those who were focusing most of their work primarily on Black males. And out of that, we developed this community science intermediary that now brings together multi-sector providers who provide care, government officials, planning professionals, citizens, just really to make more solid and strong the Region's My Brother's Keeper initiative, which we now serve as, to develop regional and strategic plans to advance equitable access to economic opportunity for Black males, to disrupt dehumanizing care or fragmented care coordination that Black males experience, and by providing them with personalized life coaching. That is what HomeGrown is centered on. And our vision is that it's important that we try to increase the economic mobility of St. Louis' 60,000 Black males between the ages of 12 to 29 by the year 2040. And we want to do that using data-driven, but also very community-learned practices that will allow us to do that as a region. Now, this is a very different sort of strategy. This is a strategy saying that we want to see change in this population. And if you change the outcomes for Black males in St. Louis, you change St. Louis outcomes overall for everyone. Black males are that central, and it focuses not necessarily on things that they're not good at, but what are our vision and dreams for them. Next slide. So our mission as HomeGrown is to help to serve as that table, bringing together those who want to focus on a vision that would make St. Louis the #1 city of its kind, you know, where it's the best places for young Black males to grow up, where St. Louis is the best place for young Black males to attend college, where St. Louis is the #1 city where Black males work and own homes, and where Black males could be the healthiest. We think this is the sort of vision that we've been galvanizing and working with our colleagues and stakeholders around for now going on for 5 years, and now moving into our 6th. And this sort of vision is an audacious vision. It's a bold vision that you want all 60,000 of these Black males. Why? Because these are 2 critical generations that if you change their outcomes, you're setting the path for 2 to 4 generations down the line. So over this time, again, we've been working and preparing because it's, you know, we appreciate those who are in the urgency of now, who've been doing and who've been out there working directly, whether in the classroom or on the streets, but they have also been participating in this thing that we have not really been afforded the time, but now with HomeGrown, we afforded that time in the partnership with a university like us at Washington University and the Brown School and others, St. Louis University, Webster, is that we've been planning and strategizing what are the most important things that the science tells us that matter. What are those pillars that will support this level of Black male outcome, this kind of Black male economic empowerment and health and well-being. And it spans 7 pillars that we feel that if you put them in place, you will have this house that can really support Black males as they transition from adolescence to young adulthood. And we figure that if we're able to do that following the model that has unfolded with the participation of so many, we will build out the key essential things that matter to bring about this sort of system change as well as individual level outcome for Black males. And again, they span law, housing, banking and financial capability, personal safety, which is the primary issue we're going to talk about today, skills to job with a livable wage. This is in the context, we say anything that builds skills, that means education, training, but then lead to jobs with a livable wage. If we don't meet these pillars or we don't build this out, it's very difficult for us to expect different outcomes for Black males because we have not seen those sort of outcomes in 40 years of different analyses that many of you have seen us present before. And you must provide mentoring and, of course, access to health care. And that means both mental and physical health care. We figure these are the pillars of change. And our model is that you must provide a personalized approach. That means you must be able to reach them. And that's where our HomeGrown model of life coaching is coming in. So We're here to talk today about Black males' personal safety. We feel this is one of the critical ingredients that we want to begin to advance more important work, working with stakeholders in the region to focus on this. And why do we pick Black male personal safety? As I said in my brief introduction, is that, again, the conversation still centers on the idea of how do you protect St. Louis City and broader St. Louis County residents from their experiences with Black males. Too often that is the narrative that we're hearing, and again, we do not center on the idea that we must protect and ensure the personal safety of Black males. Their sense of personal safety is critically important because that's the root, just like any other citizens. If we're going to be concerned about personal safety or public safety, we must make sure that we ensure that the personal safety of young Black boys and young men who are growing up and developing in our city as they try to heal, grow, and thrive, their personal safety matters significantly. And it's one of the major pillars for anyone in order for them to feel that they can fully thrive and grow and enjoy this wonderful city and area that we call St. Louis. Next slide, please. So as the data shows us, and again, we've been having a lot of conversations, both nationally. Again, St. Louis over the last 40 years, in 1980, St. Louis ranked about 36 out of major metropolitan areas in terms of homicide. And as you know now, we often rank anywhere between 1 to 5. And last year was again another year in which the homicide rates reached a peak of 200, well, not a peak, close to the peak of 262. We have not seen this level of increase in some time now. And as you can see here, homicides rose in the city and the county respectively, okay? And it's been increasing. Next slide, please. However, as we're noticing these sort of death, it indicates to me very clearly, let me make this data a little plain and why we're talking about the personal safety. A majority of these homicide victims, those who die, are Black males. So in our discussions today, we're going to acknowledge that, again, most of the perpetrators or suspects are Black males who are having an impact on the death of Black males. So we're not going to ignore that issue. But at the same time, that's important, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is how do you ensure the personal safety of Black males? And how do we work together as a region to make sure that that is an outcome for which we can evaluate ourselves? How well do our Black males feel safe? And how are each organization, each civic infrastructure contributing to that? We're not going to get into the broader debates about whether or not it's Black on Black crime. We're not going to get into those sort of debates because, again, at the center of all this is that if we can all commit, which I think all those arguments have one fundamental goal in mind, ideally, which is to ensure the personal safety of Black males. And we know that has been getting work. Let me make it plain. In 2019, 74% of the city, just the city's homicide victims were Black males. In 2020, 78% of all victims to homicide in the city were Black males. And again, in this early data in 2021, already with 18 homicides in the city, 72% of those are Black males. So we're lifting up this issue because many of you have seen this data. This is St. Louis Police Department data. You've heard the discussions, but we're looking for a paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift is one that's centered much more on their personal safety and say, what can we do to make sure they feel safe? Because the perception of personal safety matters, and it's one of the best ways to evaluate any public safety system. I mean, that's what the dialogue has been about. That often we talk about whether or not St. Louis is safe enough. Again, it impacts our businesses. You had Centene, we had a conversation as a region that business like Centene and others are saying they don't feel St. Louis might be safe enough. But again, focusing on that is important, but what about the males, the ones who died? Yeah. And those who are living, trying to find a way to enjoy, to grow, to go to school, they also deserve a good sense of personal safety. And I feel that often we ignore that. And we don't center on that, because if they are feeling safe, they're less likely to engage in other behaviors that they would do to control their perception of personal safety. I mean, they might join with a gang, they might pick up a weapon, they might engage in other behaviors that might relate to some of this interpersonal violence that we're seeing that's leading to this homicide rate. But I think it all goes back down to the roots for anyone. Do they feel safe? And who's making sure that they feel safe? Who's making sure that they are safe? That should be the way we should evaluate, in one lens, our public safety system and our ability to move us in the right direction. Next slide, please. So I'm saying that just to highlight some data from 2017, and again, we've seen this pattern over time. This is not one trend. 40 years of St. Louis data that we have been analyzing here at Homegrown and Race and Opportunity Lab has shown that the metrics of whether or not black males are moving up economically are getting worse. We know black males used to make close to $30,000 a year. That's black males 18 to 29. That is in 1980. Now they make about $10,000 to $11,000 a year on average. These are working black males. $10,000 to $11,000 a year, working black males. We're not headed in the right direction. We can do better. What you see here on this slide tells you that in 2020, 206 of the homicide victims in the city of St. Louis were black males. We know that St. Louis now graduates roughly about, well, 1 out of every 10 black males, and that's rounding up, 1 out of 10 gets a bachelor's degree or better. 1 out of 10. That means if you look at that, roughly for the, say, 13,383 black males who reside in the city, estimated to reside in the city of St. Louis, that's roughly 134 who probably got a bachelor's degree in 2020. 206 were killed in 2020. Roughly about 134 got a bachelor's degree. We can do better. We must do better. It's not only important to just the black families and friends and those who love these individuals and who love black boys and young men, but it's critically important for the region. We're directly tied together. If the pandemic has made it obvious to some, because I think it was obvious to many, that we're tied together. And this is a moment for us to really say, well, what really matters? And focus on bringing about what really matters that would improve the conditions, not just for this population, but again, you change the outcome for this group, you change the outcome for the region. And what matters is that we advance black male personal safety. So the consequences impacts us all if black male personal safety is not secure. As I mentioned, again, homicide disproportionately impacts the black community. We know that. We know guns are the major tools that are used, but victimization, this sort of death and injury and challenges to black male personal safety has a health, financial, and mental cost to the communities. The business impact is substantial. Again, I mentioned the Centene Corporation. Again, these trends have an impact on neighborhoods and the perceptions of these neighborhoods and the perception of our city and our region. We have the ability to do so much more. So what is it that we're suggesting here in this dialogue and as Homegrown? Homegrown represents a collective, it's not just us. Next slide, please. Is that we take a paradigm shift. A focus on residents' fear centers their personal safety. So studies have found that the fear of crime and crime itself were not highly correlated, meaning that people have more fear than they have a chance of being victimized. And that's what's pervasive in the current dialogue. Those who perceive more fear, St. Louis generally, versus those who are actually much closer to being victimized, black males. So our goal is then to say, let's align our level of concern with the populations more likely to be impacted. Next slide, please. So there's an approach to this that I want to make sure we highlight. This kind of scanning, analysis, response, and assessment model for public safety. It's being done in other regions, and we can do it here. It's a rational method to say, identify and analyze problems and develop specific responses to individual problems, and then assess how well we have done. So this type of approach says you want to be strategic and very focused, and it's found to have larger effects on reducing the fear of crime than community policing. Even though the fear of crime is a perception, people make real decisions based on that perception, which can impact neighborhoods' vitality and the commercial vitality of our region. We say we're offering today to frame this conversation centered around a policing framework for Black male personal safety. We said it's important that we calibrate people's fear of crime to the actual risk of crime. And again, the Seattle Police Department conducts a survey every 1 to 2 years that measures community concerns, including fear of crime. The data allow officers to attempt to reduce high levels of fear in safe neighborhoods and increase vigilance in less safe neighborhoods. The survey reveals trends that can be used to signal how do we target our public safety efforts and where they might be needed. So this level of collecting data from residents is affordable given the online and text-based systems that are out there. We can do this as a region, St. Louis, and Homegrown wants to be a part of that strategy with you. So the fear of crime can be specifically targeted, as well as metrics to assess the effectiveness of our police departments and public safety. We think this is the critical piece to be involved. What are we recommending? That there's a paradigm shift, that we regularly collect this data on the personal safety perceptions of residents, especially Black males, that we use this data to measure our strategies and to what we know can be effective in reducing Black males' sense of fear. And then critically important, it allows you to target police strategies because you can build trust with the residents because they want to tell you what is causing them to be fearful. This is what all residents in North City, North County, South City, East, West, this is what we want. Residents want this. Next slide, please. So thank you. So our goal today is that I'm hoping that this framing will allow us to have a conversation about Black male personal safety and how it's important for us to be able to advance a strategy that targets what makes them fearful. If we know that, then public safety strategies can really be effective and all of St. Louis will be better off. Michael Jones?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Joe, for really setting the context for us. And next we will hear from three young African-American men who were in the St. Louis area. I know each of them well and know their work well. So I'm excited to present these three brothers. And we've asked them to prepare a short, brief 5 to 7 minute interaction regarding Black male safety from their personal perspective. So I'll ask you brothers this, Jamar, Mike, and Jonathan, if you would just open up in that order and tell us a little bit about yourself and start to enhance on these pieces that are present on the slideshow. And after which, after Jonathan speaks, we will move to Sergeant Kevin Bentley, who will introduce himself and share a few points from the perspective of policing. And then we will conclude with Dr. Robert Motley, who will talk about his research with emotional and behavioral consequences of negative interactions with police and associated with personal safety responses. After Dr. Motley speaks, we will go into a 10-minute break and after which go into our breakout sessions. Thank you, brothers. Jamar, if you could start it off, followed by Mike and Jonathan.
All right. Thank you. Good morning. And thank you to Mike. Thank you to Dr. Sean Joe and my HomeGrown StL family for having me this morning. And thank you all for showing up. Almost 100 people here is amazing. And it just shows how important this is that 100 people showed up on this early Monday morning to have this conversation and discussion. So I'll make sure I breeze through everything fairly quickly. Use my 7 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, as appropriately as I can. So my name is Jamar Perry. I'm originally from Philadelphia. I've been in the St. Louis area for about almost 5 years. Next month will be my anniversary. So I have a background in social work. So I have my master's in social work from SLU. Bounced around and worked around in a lot of spaces and places in St. Louis since I've been here, practicums, part-time jobs, the whole deal. And the thing that I've done and worked on since graduating from SLU is I co-founded a program called The Village Path, where we started off doing healing and writing circles for self-identified Black men, which allowed Black men in the St. Louis region to have an area to be vulnerable, an area to share writings, an area, a place to listen to each other, and a space to do that. From then, we worked on the mental aspect. So we also offer now officially free services for Black men to receive free therapy from Black clinicians. So we're in the process of getting that off the ground and doing that. And we also work with children in the area. We have a rite of passage program that's in a couple after school programs. And we also host a podcast where Black men are allowed to come on and share their stories. And now we're working on the wellness aspect of it too, and the physical aspect of it all. So most of my formative discussions when it comes to personal safety took place in where I'm from, which is Philadelphia. My life in St. Louis is drastically different than it was back home. Now I'm married, I have kids, so most of my day just revolves around dropping kids off, going to work, and going home and sitting home. So I'm pretty washed and boring these days, and working on the Village Path stuff. But a few weeks ago, around before Christmas, I stepped off to walk my dog. Me and my wife just bought a house in South City. So, you know, I'm walking the dog. I get halfway up the block, and I hear a lot of gunshots to where I was super nervous and didn't know where the gunshots were coming from. So all I could do was hit the ground. And in the process, I lost my wallet. So I get up, I check myself for bullet holes because that's how close the gunshots were. And then I run home, and the dog beats me home. So I get home. I tell my wife what happened. She said she heard the gunshots. I sit and, you know, I catch my breath and, you know, I kind of recollect on what just happened. And a few minutes passed, and my wife, you know, calmly asks me to get a banana from the kitchen. So after I get the banana, you know, I still make fun of her about that today. I could almost lost my life. But after that, I've, you know, for a few weeks now, probably a few months, I've had a little bit of PTSD when it comes to walking my dog at night and just fearing of getting hit with just a random bullet. I recently just got over that. So the spaces that I create help people deal with things like that or other things that come up throughout life. So yeah, that's my personal space narrative. That's my narrative when it comes to personal safety. So thank you all for listening.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for sharing your story, Jamar. I think that's important to hear these stories. Thank you, Dr. Joe, Dr. Jones, for giving us the platform to be able to share these stories. I think our stories are really our weapon to combat a lot of the issues that we see in the words of Bruce Franks. So thank you for that. My name is Michael Whittier. I'm born and raised in St. Louis. Spent some time away in school. Now I'm back working at St. Louis Integrated Health Network as a strategist of justice and health equity, where I work to advance health equity strategies in the criminal justice system, working with all the criminal justice agencies in the region to improve access to resources that enables one to thrive and to live with a specific focus on transitional age youth through a social determinants of health lens. And really how I got to this work is really rooted in my upbringing. I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. And so I went to school with that in mind. Got into Meharry, where I wanted to go, came home because I was a student athlete, didn't have time to come home much. So I spent a year in St. Louis. And during that year, I worked at Mercy Hospital, where I got a little bit of mentorship. And I learned that I wanted to be a doctor, but I didn't necessarily want to practice medicine. I wanted to really create communities or help communities be able to be well, but I didn't necessarily want to do that in one-on-one interventions. And I fell in love with healthcare administration when I got to learn about policies, macro level changes. This is right after the Affordable Care Act and understanding what the Affordable Care Act really intended to do. And the more I reflected on that was really based in my upbringing. I have never felt safe in St. Louis, no matter where I was. Grew up in Wellston, family in North St. Louis, Walnut Park to be specific. My family founded Emmanuel Temple Church of God, which is still there long before I was here. And between those, I knew everybody that had guns. I knew everybody that potentially was terrorizing communities, but then I also knew everybody that was trying to improve it. And that's still true to this day. Family, friends, people that I'm connected to, but maybe 1-2 degrees of separation. I know maybe about 5 people that have been killed in the last 2 years. I've had family since about 2016, lost about 6 or 7 cousins to gun violence. Just a couple weeks ago, someone attempted to rob me outside of a bank in the Central West End. I am the grandson of a veteran and a former police chief of Kinloch. So I've learned to use a gun and be observant and vigilant since I was young. And so I actually pulled my weapon first before he was able to even come close. And he asked him his age, and he was 16 years old. Similarly, the kids that I mentor, that I serve in the community, are the same communities, are the same people that are experiencing a lot of this just lack of safety. And it doesn't stop there. Went to a predominantly white high school, Webster Groves, where I didn't necessarily feel safe there. If it's too quiet at night, I don't feel safe. But I've learned to manage. I learned to navigate that. And I think that's one of the unique parts of dealing with pain and trauma. There's a unique way of healing and navigating all of that. With that, I put it into my work. I put it into my story, use my story as a weapon to help, to heal, to provide safety for others, to create safe spaces that allow other people to feel safe. And that's been my goal. I wrote about that when Dr. Joe and HomeGrown StL gave me the privilege to do that in the American. And I promise to continue to do that. So I really thank you all for this platform. Continue to just wrap your arms around young Black boys and men because St. Louis isn't the best place for us, but there are people that want to push it forward.
Good morning, everybody. I want to give a thank you to Jamar and Mike just for sharing you all's story with everyone. I currently serve as the Peace Program Associate with the American Friends Service Committee. Jamar, which is actually out of Philly, is based out of Philly. And I also do some work with Employment Connections, Cure Violence. And I appreciate you, Brother Mike, and also Dr. Sean Joe for the work you all are doing with HomeGrown StL. You know, it can't be overstated or overemphasized that research, that data-driven effort is definitely needed. And, you know, I'll try to keep my comments very brief. You know, the state of, Black male personal safety, as my panelists have shared in their own experience, is, as people have commented with the question that was posed early on, it's all over the place. We got various different responses. Me, I'm from St. Louis, born and raised, playing North Side, but I've lived all over. But even if we just talk about North City and stuff like that, we just closed majority of the school board. The St. Louis Public School Board just decided to close a majority of schools in St. Louis that are located in where I live, in the area in which I live. And I just find it interesting that we're quick to defund, educational experiences and opportunities, and divest from educational experiences and opportunities, places and spaces where youth can be in a space that is supervised by adults that often look like them, in communities that often look like them. But we'll be quick to have a public safety budget that's about, I heard from 40% to 60% in the city of St. Louis, right? And there's violence prevention programs that are starting up. Like I said, I have ties to Cure Violence and stuff like that. They haven't been up a year yet. With this much compared to the larger public safety budget of the city of St. Louis, it's really place-based. It recruits residents from neighborhoods to help pick up some of the dirt they've left behind in community. and people are, hightail about that. They're like, how's the effectiveness of it? Is it working? Is it working? Is it work? Where's our money being spent? And if we had that same kind of attitude towards the public safety department, maybe we'd see some, we wouldn't have so many unsolved crimes. It's not just the bad individuals within these departments. I know a lot of these individuals. I'm thinking about former officer Heather Taylor. And I know we have some officers on this call, but the way in which we traditionally look at law and order and how to prevent crime from happening is often really follows a really tradition of status quo thinking. And so I say that to say this. Growing up, I think we often are very respectable when we talk about the need for Black men to be, to face and, move towards upward mobility. I think the goal by 2040 is definitely excellent. It needs to happen, but the help is definitely needed today. We focus too often on tattoos on young people's bodies, when often those tattoos are their symbols of trauma, they're symbols of family members that have passed. That's a way of them paying homage to them. We focus on young people that cuss a lot, when often they are unheard, and speaking of which, so I'm glad that I hope there are young people on this call that they were invited to be on this call, because, when they're not heard, they're going to show out and act out a certain kind of way. And we also, tend to focus on, just this idea that, young people are the problem. And really, we need to really be real about the situation. If adults had all the solutions, we wouldn't be talking right now. Right. And the young people are going to be our future leaders, lawyers, doctors, nurses, teachers, etc. And so we need to follow the direction of young people as we move forward and stuff like that. But I'll summarize all my comments just to say, thank you all for inviting me to be on, share space with you all, share pieces of my story and just my analysis on the situation. And I hope HomeGrown StL and its partners continue to do the good work of moving St. Louis forward, particularly for those on the margins.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and Jamar and Mike as well. We appreciate your kind-hearted words from the heart, and I'm certain that each individual was able to take that in. And we'll just push right along now and turn it over to Detective Sergeant Kevin Bentley, who will be represented on behalf of law enforcement, and followed by him, Dr. Robert Motley.
Oh, some powerful young brothers. First, before I start, I just want to say that I hate the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic, because I would much rather be face to face where I could soak up some of this energy from these positive, powerful brothers and sisters. Wow. I got to follow up behind that. Okay. Again, I'm Detective Kevin Bentley. I've been with the police department for 22 and a half years. I have a diverse background, which I think has helped me be a better police officer. I was born in Madison, Wisconsin. My parents were in college. Was there till I was 7 or 8. Now, mind you, Madison, Wisconsin is sort of like the Delmar Loop area, a liberal college-like town. After that divorce, we moved to St. Louis, and I moved to Pine Line. And you talk about culture shock. From Madison to Pine Line. Pine Line is where I, as the kids say, learned to throw hands, because I got tired of running. From Pine Line, moved to Skinker to Bolivar area, west side of St. Louis. I've been to 9 different schools within St. Louis, predominantly Black, predominantly white, mixed, Catholic schools. Went to Ladue High School. From Ladue, went down to Morehouse for two years, where I didn't do what I was supposed to do, and came back to St. Louis. Went into the corporate world and decided to go on the police department. Really don't know why, but I want to thank Ms. Thurman for inviting me to this. This is powerful. This is something that is needed. And when we talk about the safety of Black males, from the position that I'm in from law enforcement, I think it's twofold. I think what I've been doing and need to do more of, and I wish the police department supported it more, and that is helping our young males be able to interact with police, giving them the knowledge and the tools needed to deal with some of my coworkers who don't have their best interests at heart. Some of my coworkers who tarnish the badge. That's twofold. The other half of that is continuing the work within the police department to change the culture. I'm a proud member of the Ethical Society of Police. I've been a member since going through the police academy. For those that don't know, the Ethical Society of Police was formed back in 1972 to combat racism and inequality within the police department. That was the initial focus. It kind of changed to not only focus on the police department, but in our community. One of the brothers mentioned Heather Taylor, good friend of mine. She's a former president of the Ethical Society. We now have Sergeant Donnell Walters, who has picked up the torch and has taken us into the future. Now, with when I joined the police department, real quick, I heard one of the brothers mention Walnut Park. When I came out of police academy, I went to Walnut Park, which is the 6th district, home of the real police, like we like to say. From the 6th district, the Housing Authority unit was started, where joined the Housing Authority unit, and Cochran, Blue Myers, Peabody started policing that area. I thought I knew the streets until I went to that area, and that was eye-opening. From the Housing Authority unit, the GREAT program came to St. Louis, and I was the first officer to teach the GREAT program, which is Gang Resistance Education and Training. It was like a new age DARE program where we focused on gangs, and we were in the elementary and the middle schools, and I did that for about 1.5 years, and then moved into the gang unit where I was 15 years. From the gang unit, went to the Intervention and Compliance unit, where we worked closely with probation and parole, getting young brothers that didn't have violent felonies, getting them jobs, mentoring. Excellent unit that was brought to the police department through my mentor, Colonel Ronnie Robinson. But like I believe it was Jonathan who stated about budgets and about having a small amount of money where he's trying to do work, and then he sees that agencies like the police get all this money. He's right. And within the police department, when we try to initiate programs that are going to help specifically young men and our boys, it's not really backed, because our police department is stats driven. They want to see arrests, and I'm outspoken. We cannot arrest our way out of the problems that we see. I'm passionate about helping my people, and just putting cuffs on them and throwing them in the penitentiary and prisons and jail is not working, and it's not going to work. So I've been lucky enough to be a part of programs within the police department that are preventive in nature, but we don't get the backing from the police department. In the gang unit, we were more intelligence driven. We didn't do a lot of arrests. We hit the streets. We're in the schools. We're in the high schools trying to find out what was going on in terms of the gang feuds, and trying to diffuse some of that and be mediators. Well, that wasn't good enough because it didn't put people on steel. We couldn't show quantitative, the police departments need to see how the program is helping crime. We knew it was helping. The community leaders were telling the police department that it was helping, but it wasn't showing up in as far as stats. Getting back to what we think would help, or what I think would help, is hitting the young kids 12, all the way up, helping them deal with police. Like I said, the do's and don'ts. You know, I go into schools and try to tell them, try to get them to understand the mindset of some of my coworkers who don't have their best interests at heart. Where how to deal with car stops, how to deal with being stopped on the police on the street, and things that they need to do if they feel like they were the civil rights were violated. What they need to do to bring light to the situation of them being hampered or hurt in some cases. Also, we need to focus on helping them navigate these streets of St. Louis, dealing with anger management and conflict resolution, letting them know the importance of how to properly interact on social media. That's something that often is overlooked. So, you know, I can go on forever, but I want to focus on the fact that it takes us within the department to help change the culture so we can build the bridges in the community. People can feel safe talking to us, helping us do our job as far as combating crime. And the flip side of that is getting involved in the community, being mentors, helping our young males feel safe when they're around the police.
Thank you, Detective. Go ahead, Dr. Joe.
Yeah, let me jump in here real quickly if you don't mind, and then we'll keep the time. Sergeant Bentley, I want to thank you very much. Michael, Jamar, Jonathan, this is so critically important. Sergeant, you mentioned something again that it's data driven, and one of the things we're trying to propose is that measuring how residents feel, whether or not they feel safe, is measurable, and other cities are doing it. So the things that you were doing, we can now actually measure by measuring whether or not people feel safe in their neighborhoods, and particularly for these males. So this is an easy stat that can be added to show that that's the difference. And in fact, we would argue that's one of the most important outcomes. That it's not necessarily did the homicide just drop, but if people are feeling safer, more than likely the homicide will drop. If they're feeling safer, more than likely the interpersonal violence is probably dropping. So I think that's something that we can present. What do you think about that as the strategy? Because that's what we're trying to suggest. This is one additional data point that has real impact and has real consequences, whether or not we really help to make people feel safer, particularly these males.
Now, when I was talking about data, that's not to say that your data is not important. I think it's excellent what you're doing. When I was talking about data, I meant as far as how the police department determine whether or not your program will stay in existence or whether or not it will get funded. That's what I meant. I mean, data is necessary, but I'm saying that the stuff that I was doing in the community with the gang unit and the intervention and compliance unit, you can't look at it the same way you do other programs as far as how many people are you guys arresting? Because we weren't arresting, we were helping. And I'm just trying to get the powers that be on my department to start looking through a different lens and to get out and talk to the community, see if what we're doing is effective. Talk to these young brothers that we were helping get jobs and we mentor. You know, you talk to them. That way you'll know. But if you don't care about that, then it's going to show up. And I'm saying we need to change the culture and we need to start caring about that to help these young brothers out here.
So we have a good opportunity, and others who are in the panel could weigh in. I think what we're saying is that we have a good opportunity to partner with law enforcement officers like yourself and Ethical Society and anyone who wants to make sure this perception of personal safety, this perception of safety is how police departments and law enforcement agencies could be evaluated, that it should be part of that process. In addition to the arrest, is how safer do you make residents feel, or how safer residents feel. So we want to partner with all who want to make this part of that process. So that's the paradigm shift. So we're in agreement that can, and it can be done, because what you were doing is making some young people feel safer. And that level of trust will allow, because the data tells us, the science tells us, if I feel I can come and tell you what's going on and I'm safe in doing that, I'm going to tell you. If I don't feel safe in doing that, you're not going to get the trust. So it goes together. It goes together. So I agree with you totally 100%. Mike, I'm turning it back over. I just felt that was an important point to highlight.
Yes. Absolutely, Dr. Joe. Thank you. And again, Detective Sergeant Kevin, we appreciate you. We look forward to staying in touch with you moving forward.
All right. Good morning, everybody. It's definitely been a pleasure to be speaking today and to be a part of this great panel. And for the gentlemen, Jamar, Mike, Jonathan, Detective Bentley, definitely have spoken some heartfelt words. And hopefully what I'm going to discuss will more so support what we all have been listening to thus far. Again, my name is Robert Motley. I'm a recently defended my dissertation here at the Brown School of Social Work, where I will now be making the transition over to Boston College School of Social Work in June. So just in case anyone wanted to know. And so my research pretty much looks at, exposure to police violence and its impact on Black emerging adults, but particularly when we talk about Black males. And so you can go to the next slide for me. And so what we know from national data, there are several different data sources that collect information regarding the number of people who are killed by police. And what we know is that, and this is just looking from data from 2015 to up until 2020, we see roughly about 1,000 individuals are killed by police every year. And if you look at the next one, we see it's predominantly males who are being killed as a result of police violence. And then when you look by ethnic groups, you can see that it's more white people are killed each year by police, and then followed by Black and Hispanic. But sometimes these numbers here can be deceiving because what's really telling is when you look at it by population size, because we know that roughly, Black people in America, we make up between 13 and 15% of the population, Hispanics 18%, and white a little bit over 60%. So if you go to the next slide. So when we look at it by population size across those years, as you can see at the top line, for every 1,000 Black individuals, you see that 5 of them are killed by police. And you can see that trend is consistent from 2015 all the way up into 2020. So when you look at it by population size, roughly Black individuals are pretty much between 2 to 3 times more likely to be killed than their white and Hispanic counterparts. And that also holds even when you're looking at those who are unarmed and killed by police as well. Next slide. But one of the things about when we look at this, when we think about police killing, that's not the only types of force that Black individuals, particularly Black males, endure in their lifetimes. There's other types of non-fatal violence that they're exposed to. When we talk about, whether it's being shouted at, cursed, threatened with assault, push, grab, or even put in handcuffs. And so what this slide you're looking at, this was some data that me and Dr. Joe, we published looking at national data of Black individuals who were stopped as a result of a street stop, and how many of them reported being exposed to police use of force during those street stops. And so as you see at some of the shouting, cursing, and being threatened by arrest, you see predominantly more females reported experiencing those types of force in comparison to the males. But when you look at the more egregious types of force in terms of being pushed or grabbed or being put in handcuffs, you see that predominantly more Black males experienced those types of force during these street stops. And at the second level there, that just shows you how these use of force, how they differ across income groups for Black males. And particularly, we had 3 different income levels. So it was less than 20,000, 20 to 40,000, and then 49,000 and 50,000 or more. So most of those Black males who were reporting experiencing police use of force during those street stops were making less than $50,000 a year. However, what we do also know is that being exposed to police use of force also has impact on the health and behavioral health of Black males. Next slide. And so what we see is findings from research using both nationally representative samples of Black emerging adult males and also community samples. And when I say Black emerging adult males, I'm talking about those between the ages of 18 to 29. And so one research study looked at a national data set, and it showed that an increase in the number of self-reported poor mental health days was significantly reported by Black individuals within these regions of America where there were more killings of Black individuals. And they saw that all the way up until 3 to 5 months later, that more Black individuals in these regions were reporting more poor mental health days, but they did not find that association for white individuals within those regions. But also we've seen work by Dr. Amanda Keller and her colleagues seeing an association with trauma and anxiety symptoms. Jordan DeVilder and his colleagues out of Fordham University, they've done extensive work around police violence and found associations with suicide ideation and attempts, depression, and also past 12-month psychiatric experiences. But one thing that has been lacking in the research is that this exposure to not only being a victim or witnessing these things in person, but what happens when someone sees videos of police using force against another individual, and how does that impact the individual who's actually watching these videos? Next slide. And so what we know is that social media has become one of the most used platforms for communication among Black emerging adult males, with approximately 70% using Facebook, 77% using YouTube, 40% using Instagram, and 24% using Twitter. However, there's been a dearth of literature looking at the emotional impact that it can have on Black males when they view these videos. Next slide. And so we conducted a study we were examining the relationship between seeing videos of real life incidents of community-based violence. And when I say community-based violence, there was questions in there asking these Black males about their exposure to violence where there was civilian on civilian violence. But then also there was questions about when you see videos where police are the perpetrators of the violence. And this was done with a sample of a little over 100 Black emerging adult males in St. Louis, Missouri. Next slide. And so for our findings, and I want you to look at the highlighted line there. So we looked at these 3 negative emotional responses: sadness, anger, and fear. And what we found was that for the videos where police officers were the perpetrators of the violence, watching these videos was significantly associated with all 3 of these negative emotional outcomes for these males. And in this sample of males, these were males who were incarcerated at the time when I conducted this information, and we were looking at their exposure to these videos 6 months prior to them being incarcerated. So these individuals had high levels of being exposed to community violence and things of that sort. But it was only the police violence, not when you see a video of civilian on civilian violence. It was only when they were looking at videos where police were the perpetrators of the violence where they felt sad. There was an increase in their sadness, increase in anger, and also an increase in their level of fear. Next slide. And so what these findings tell us is that it's really not it's the perpetrators of the violence in the videos that we see that was seen on social media versus the type of violence is more emotionally impactful for Black emerging adult males in the current study. So it had nothing to do about what type of violence they were seeing. It was more so about who was perpetrating the violence that was more emotionally impactful for these individuals. And what we also know is that not only when you have prevalence when you have disparities in the prevalence rates of being exposed to police use of force, and also you are experiencing these mental, behavioral, emotional responses that also can impact how Black males perceive police to be in their legitimacy. Next slide. And so what we know, what researchers tell us, particularly Tyler and Jason Sunshine, is that there's 2 antecedents of police legitimacy, and one of them is police performance. So how effective are police in fighting crime and preventing disorder within communities? But then there's also the second antecedent is procedural justice. You know, how ethical are they? How honest are they? Consistent and neutral are they when they're engaging with individuals within the community? And what we know is that when any 2 of these antecedents are not upheld by police officers, some citizens may question the legitimacy of law enforcement and their trustworthiness. But also some citizens may also perceive police as a threat to their personal safety instead of a protector of it. Some of them may rely on themselves or others to ensure their personal safety. But these other two key points there, we had not seen any research that have actually looked at examining what happens when individuals, particularly Black males, are exposed to police use of force. How does that impact their perception of police legitimacy? And then what types of personal safety practices do they engage in as a result of that? Next slide. And so who do Black males in St. Louis, Missouri rely on for their personal safety, and does police legitimacy matter? Next slide. And so again, for this study, we wanted to examine that relationship between exposure, looking at whether you're a victim, witnessed it in person, or seen it in media, to police use of force, and personal safety practices, meaning that do they rely on themselves for their personal safety? Do they rely on police, or do they rely on others? For instance, their family, their friends, or their significant other. And what we wanted to do, again, is assess the relationship between exposure to police use of force and these personal safety practices, and if this relationship was mediated by perceived police legitimacy. Next slide. And so these are just our findings. Real quickly, it was a young sample, median age 20. They've been living in St. Louis for a long period of time. And as you can see down there, a lot of them were relying on themselves or others for their own personal safety, and they had high rates of being witnessing police use of force, but also seeing videos with over 33, reporting roughly over 33 videos. Next slide. But here's for the interesting findings here. What you see highlighted in red, and so when we looked across all three types of exposure, we only found a mediating model for seeing videos of police use of force. And what you see in red is that the more videos that these Black males were exposed to, it led to them an increase likely of them perceiving the police as less legitimacy. And so the reason why it's positive is because the way the police legitimacy scale is scored is that when you have higher scores, that means that you are less likely, you have less legitimacy in terms of your perceptions of police. So what that means is that more videos, less legitimacy, and that leads to them relying on police officers for their personal safety less. It shows a decrease. And so this relationship shows that when these males are exposed to that, they view police as being less legitimacy, and instead of relying on police, who do they rely on? Well, we see a direct effect that was significant between the videos and them relying on themselves for their own personal safety. And so next slide. And so the implications of this study is that an absence of procedural justice and the accompanying erosion of police legitimacy may contribute to a heightened legal cynicism and oppositional cultural attitudes, favoring alternative personal safety interventions over police interventions for some Black emerging adult males. Next slide. And so in conclusion, I state that we all must do our part in addressing inequalities in the treatment of Black civilians by police officers, particularly Black emerging adult males, but also it's time for policymakers to join together in actualizing legislation focused on police accountability and an end to police violence. Thank you.
Right on time, Dr. Motley. We greatly appreciate your work, man. If you could have seen Dr. Joe, he's all grins the entire time, because this has been 5 years in the making, right, Dr. Joe? And Dr. Motley has really put in his work in this area. Robert, if you could, there's been a lot of questions in the comments. So folks want to get in touch with you and your work. We need you to put the ways they can get contacted with you and make contact with you moving forward about this work. Dr. Joe, do you have any pieces before we go over to break?
Again, again, this morning, we really appreciate everyone's contribution. The research, the personal experience tells us that if we don't address Black males' sense of personal safety, whether it's from being victims from other Black males or from law enforcement, it has a consequence for the emotional and behavioral health of these Black males, as a consequence for our neighborhoods and communities. So we think our policy proposal here, and we're going to keep saying this, is that we must measure people's perception of personal safety. This will begin to signal to them that that there's great care for their concerns, and then that might improve the level of community policing that might result when you really know, they know that you're attending to their sense of personal safety, and particularly for these males. But it also can help us use our precious resources in more specific ways that will produce better outcomes. And at the end of the day, if individuals don't feel safe, that's one way to evaluate how well our law enforcement and public safety strategies are working. It's not just those other statistics, it's whether or not all residents feel safe. And if we can be concerned about that for those who live in Ladue, we could be concerned about that for those who live in Wellston. Now we're going to lift up many of the organizations and initiatives that are beginning to advance police accountability and that might have a strong impact on personal safety. And we want to lift up these key strategies that's being advanced by many of the partners that you might know, and give you a chance to weigh in at the end of that to let us know what you think about these different initiatives and what can be strengthened, what can be done to strengthen them and make them more impactful.
So this next section of our time together, we'll be looking at transformative initiatives for Black male personal safety. And I just want to read a quick bio of our presenters, and they will go in this order: of Jessica Myers, who's the project director with St. Louis Area Violence Prevention Commission. Jessica will present on the work of VPC's role as a regional initiative to reduce violent crime in the region by promoting and advocating for coordinated, well-resourced policies, support systems and interventions among the area governments, institutions, and agencies that serve individuals and families most at risk for violent crime. After Jessica, we will hear from Trayvon Lattimore, who is the Justice for All Senior Policy Advocacy Fellow and Forward Through Ferguson. Trayvon will be presenting on the work Forward Through Ferguson has done around police and public safety transformation. After Trayvon, we will hear from Wilford Pinckney Jr., Director of Children, Youth, and Families in the City of St. Louis. Will be presenting on the City of St. Louis Cops and Clinicians program. So after we hear from these three individuals, we will go into our breakout sessions that will be led by our three speakers who shared their personal story as well as these three individuals. So please participate accordingly. I'll turn it over to Trayvon.
Thank you all for having me on here, for inviting Forward Through Ferguson to come and speak about our efforts around public safety transformation, just police reform and police transformation. So thank you, Sean, and just the HomeGrown StL team for the invitation. I believe you all do such great work, such important and necessary and vital work as far as, you know, getting the voices of those who are most affected by these issues at the table, advocating for policy and systems changes on these things. You go next slide. So I definitely want to root the group in just Forward Through Ferguson's foundational language and like how we see ourselves as an organization, and just to go over some terms before I get into the work that we do. So I definitely want to talk about, you know, systemic racism. As we all know, it's entrenched institutional policies, practices, and behaviors that systematically disadvantage people of color and systematically benefit white people. So the word I really want to hype on is systematically. I think sometimes when, you know, in our general conversation around racism is that it has to be this one-on-one, you know, personal prejudice interaction with somebody who is racist. But we have to understand that we live in a system where over generations and years of just certain policies and systems put in place to benefit certain groups over others. It's important to understand that that is our context, and that is the system and the beast that we should be fighting against. And how we think about combating this systemic racism is this idea of systems change. So systems change is the fundamental change in policies, processes, relationships, and power structures, as well as deeply held values and norms. So thinking about change in our communities to think away, again, from that individual one-on-one, trying to change the minds of people, that's a part of the work, but also how do we combat those systems and policies that are in place, you know, regardless of who is over them, to fight against those. So, and we saw the main tenet of Forward Through Ferguson is racial equity. So trying to push toward St. Louis that is racially equitable, in which a person's life outcomes cannot be predicted by race. So when our regional systems, education, housing, healthcare, jobs, transportation, and more work well for all people, including Black people and white people, so that disparities are closed and all residents, regardless of their race and zip code, have justice and opportunity to thrive. You go next. And just to show the importance of focusing on racial equity is to identify what is inequitable in our society. So I know a study done in 2012 by a few economists and, policy researchers at the UMSL Policy Research Institution found that if St. Louis was racially equitable and that all people's life outcomes weren't dependent on the race, our region's gross domestic product will increase by $13 billion. And then you see like the nice graphics on the side when it comes to the income disparities and also like disparities amongst police reform. We lose out on billions of dollars in revenue and just economic activity for the communities that need it most because of this racial inequity. Overall, Fort Ferguson's mission is to embrace the Ferguson Commission's mandate. So for those who may not be familiar, the Ferguson Commission was put together after the events in Ferguson, after Michael Brown was shot and killed by a Ferguson police officer, as this large one-year project to come together and identify different calls to actions and policy implementations that, if implemented, could lead toward a racially equitable society. So we embrace all these 189 calls to action in our work, and we center impacted communities. So, of course, communities North County, North City, and communities elsewhere in the region, and mobilizes accountable bodies to advance racially equitable systems and policies that ensure all people in the St. Louis region can thrive. So I specifically work in the Justice for All section. So within Fort Ferguson, there are 3 different priorities. We have the Justice for All, which is around police reform, municipal court reform, youth at the center, so focusing on education, and then also opportunity to thrive. So focusing on segregation, housing, everything that comes with that. So I'll talk a little bit about just our Justice for All signature priority and then some work that we've done there. So just a little bit about Justice for All. The Commission identified priority calls to action for police reform, court reform, and consolidation of police departments and municipal courts at the onset after they put together this report. So these are just a few of the buckets that we are focusing on here in 2021 and that we have focused on within the last year and a half. So the first one is this idea of divesting and defunding from certain police roles and certain things within the public safety department that I think Sergeant Bentley had talked about earlier that, our answer can't be to incarcerate. It has to be to invest in different things in our society that actually lead to public safety. So like education, healthcare, mental health resources, resources for people who experience homelessness. And then thinking about how to reinvest those funds to push towards more foundational public safety that get at the root causes of violence and harm in our communities. And also this idea of first responder alternatives, which is a little similar. I think, a lot of people can agree that police are often called on to do everything and that we want, different types of professionals to respond to different types of crises. So if we have a mental health crisis that is not harmful to people, what does it look like to call, 911, they send a mental health professional over an armed police officer. And then, same things with homelessness and other issues. So real quickly, just focusing on the protections that police have under police union contracts that may not reflect how the community wants them to survey and protect their communities. And also thinking about use of force reform. So kind of that downstream focus on, making sure that police are held accountable for any misconduct or things that they can do. I see Sergeant Billy clapping. I'm clapping too. And I just want to talk real briefly about some of the recent work that we've done over the last year and a half. So this is a little bit before I actually started here. So Fort Ferguson does a lot of data and research. Really awesome things. If you all want to check out our current state of education report, it talks about just our regional education and where we've come from since Michael Brown was killed. And this report, it just shows between 3 different police departments, so the Ferguson Police Department, the North County Co-op in North County, and also the City Police Department, Metropolitan Police Department, and seeing how, between policy change, practice change, and program change, we focus on the policy change because we think that's will have more long-term effect in our region, and analyzing the different work that has been done over the years. And I'm not going to all the specifics, but this is available for people to see how far, our police departments have come since the events in Ferguson. So this past summer, you know, it was a pretty wild summer around the killings of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others. You know, I feel like every year there's always a new name. And we talk about, you know, Black male safety and the killings of Black males. Before the Ferguson had partnered with different organizations such as Action St. Louis, our City Defenders, and the Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression, also known as CAPCAR, to come up with these 5 demands for the city to, you know, just have more accountability, and for the St. Louis region to think more about how the police department here has, you know, carried out harm against our community as well, and to be in line with the national conversation around police reform and police transformation. So we have 5 demands that people can sign on to. I believe we got almost 1,000 signatures to kind of just push our city in the right direction. This is an exciting series that do some water, that I was able to work on during my time as a fellow, called the Power Behind the Badge series. So I was able to do some of the work that the previous fellow had done and build on his work around these community accountability tools. So on the left, I see on the left, you know, it's kind of a map that outlines how policy is made in St. Louis City. So when we talk about, you know, police accountability, when we talk about police transformation, there are a lot of systems and processes in place that the lay citizen may not know, that will be beneficial for them to know to lead towards the transformation that we want to see. So this week has a 3-part series. We invited some elected officials, some activists, some community leaders, both here in St. Louis, also nationally, to talk about how we can, you know, make the change that we want to see. And then we also had information about like the police budget. We talked about a lot of, just like a lot of the systems and processes that exist in the public safety arena. Happy to talk more about the specifics of those. We were able to work with different organizations such as CAPCAR to really focus on like police union contracts and the collective bargaining agreement process. So within those, usually when we talk about police accountability, sometimes we're very outraged about why police aren't held accountable, but a lot of the reason why they aren't exists within these union contracts that they, you know, they kind of, it's a process kind of under the rug, not really transparent to the community. So we really wanted to, and we're still working on this, on getting more community input in this process. So we were able to work with some of our relationships in the county council to pass a resolution to, you know, it's not binding, but to kind of push the police union contract to have more transparent processes when going through the police union contract, so that community have the input about, you know, this important contract that really dictates how police governs certain areas in the region. You can go next. Yeah, and there's definitely more to come in 2021. We have a lot of things brewing in the pot. There's my contact information if you want to reach out to me about, you know, any collaboration or any questions you may have about our work. And also like our social media, STL Change is our handle on most things. And of course, our website has a lot of information about what we do. So happy to talk further.
Thank you so much, Trayvon, for your contributions from Ford through Ferguson. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Jessica, who will talk again on behalf of St. Louis Area Violence Prevention Commission. Without further ado, Jessica.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for coming today. I want to thank Dr. Joe and Alyssa and the HomeGrown team for facilitating this. I want to thank my fellow panelists, especially Jamar, Mike, Jonathan, for sharing your own personal experiences. I do want to state before I get started that it's not lost on me that I am one of the only, if not the only, white panelist that is in this town hall today. And it's something that I have reflected on throughout my career, working with victims of violence at Crime Victim Center and then transitioning to the St. Louis Area Violence Prevention Commission. So I don't want that to go unsaid, because it is something that is a salient part of the work that we do, and something that I have really looked into during my entire career. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how our work supports community and supports those that are working towards racial equity and dismantling systemic racism. When we're talking about violence, we always start with this quote from the Prevention Institute. The determinants of violence are multiple, complex, and often interrelated. A successful strategy must include the participation of a broad group of individuals and a range of activities that link with, build upon, and add value to each other. We can't have one single silver bullet, for lack of a better term, strategy to reduce violence. We can't arrest our way out of a violence problem. We can't incarcerate our way out of a violence problem. We can't have one poverty program to get ourselves out of a violence problem. We need an all hands on deck strategy, and we cannot have enough people in St. Louis working towards a safer St. Louis for young Black men and boys. We need to address a variety of issues if we really want to have a safe and healthy, and not just safe, but a thriving St. Louis. Next slide, please. And so when we're looking at how do we create a comprehensive violence prevention strategy for St. Louis, we want to look at the social determinants of health. If we want to build a healthy community, we need to look at all of these. If you want to build a healthy body, you need to look at your blood pressure, and you need to look at your body mass index, and you need to look at your blood sugar. Those are all physical determinants of health. But what we know is that aspects of where you live and where you work and where you play affect your health outcomes, your physical health outcomes. And so these are just some of the things we look at. Your neighborhood and built environment. We've done a study with one of our committees that showed that vacancy is the biggest environmental correlate of crime in St. Louis. If we don't address vacant properties in St. Louis, we're not going to be able to reduce crime long term. We also know that when buildings are torn down, they can release lead contamination. Lead contamination is correlated with poor performance in school, with behavioral outcomes that often get young folks kicked out of school, and with involvement in the criminal justice system later in life. So we need to look at the neighborhoods and the built environment. Access or lack of access to mental health care is a huge driver of violence. And we know there are large swaths of St. Louis City where folks don't have access to health care and mental health care. The social and community context. We talked earlier about police legitimacy. And do you rely on yourself and those around you for unofficial personal safety rather than going through the official channels? Education is a huge factor. We know especially young Black boys that get kicked out of class are much more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system later. And economic stability. We know if you map poverty and you map violence, you're making the same map. Chris Krenner, who works at St. Louis University, just posted a map this morning that he did about mortgage rejections. Folks who apply for mortgages and don't get approved. And it's the same map that you get when you're mapping crime. And so we need to address all these different factors. And in order to do this, we need a coalition of the willing, and it needs to be a large coalition of the willing to address all of these. Next slide, please. And so we've created the Violence Prevention Commission. This was really out of the recognition that there are a lot of individual programs and there are a lot of folks working on violence prevention, but we need a regional strategy. We need a regional table. It can't just be a city strategy. It can't just be a county strategy. It can't just be a municipal strategy. It needs to be all of those groups. And as I said, we need to build a coalition of the willing that's large enough to work on all these different issues. And so the Violence Prevention Commission has more than 60 member agencies from a variety of sectors. You see just some of the sectors here: education, workforce development, government. We do have law enforcement and public safety at the table. The important thing about our public health approach, though, is they're not the only folks at the table. We need to address the social and the health outcomes in addition to having public safety at the table. Philanthropy. We need to examine how we fund programs that work on reducing violence. Social services, research. And I think one of the most important things that I do as a representative of the Violence Prevention Commission and as an advocate is to really help all these folks understand that even if they don't have a violence prevention effort, a specific violence prevention program, they have a stake in violence prevention. They have programs that contribute to violence prevention. So education contributes to violence prevention. Jobs contribute to violence prevention. Healthcare contributes to violence prevention. And I think probably the most important group that we bring to the table and that we continually try to bring to the table more often are community residents. They are the experts on their own personal safety. They are the experts on what is happening in their neighborhood. And without grounding the work that we do in the opinions and the safety and the activities of the residents that live in these neighborhoods, we won't be able to reduce violence long term. And when we're talking about reducing violence, we're not talking about having less violence in St. Louis in the summer of 2020. We're talking about real generational change that will make this generation and generations in the future, generations of young Black men, safer in the St. Louis region. I did see a question come up about corporations. We are doing outreach to corporations because absolutely they do have a stake in the violence prevention efforts. Next slide, please. This is just a quick timeline. I don't want to go through all of this, but I do want to talk about how VPC started. We were originally convened in January of 2016 by the Gun Violence Initiative at Washington University and the United Way. So we're celebrating our 5-year anniversary. We have grown in those years to include one full-time staff member, that's me, and several part-time staff members that contribute to what we're doing. But one other thing I want you to take from this is that St. Louis has done a lot of planning and a lot of studying. So the Department of Justice came in and did their diagnostic report for the city of St. Louis. We did a risk needs responsivity report. We did a crime trend study. We did a youth violence prevention partnership, safe and thriving community strategic plan. One of the things that St. Louis is not always the best at, however, is following through on the implementation of those plans and taking what we know in the past has worked in St. Louis and what we know has worked in other cities and implementing that here. And so the Violence Prevention Commission has taken some of the hallmarks of those studies and contributed to our action plan, which we approved in September of 2018. Importantly, we are also the action team lead for violence prevention for the Community Health Improvement Plan, or the CHIP. The CHIP is a partnership between the St. Louis City and County Health Departments, the hospital systems, and other community partners. And so we lead the violence prevention action team. So one takeaway from this is if you hear about a violence problem and you hear someone say no one's working on it, we are working on it. We are looking for more partners. Forward Through Ferguson is working on it. HomeGrown StL is working on it. They're all part of the Violence Prevention Commission and our action plan to make folks safer in St. Louis. Next slide, please. So we have 3 objectives in our action plan. The first is to improve the community level response to non-fatal shootings. What we know is that for every homicide that makes the news, every murder that you see on TV, in St. Louis City, there's about 20 to 30 non-fatal shootings where someone is shot and doesn't die from their injuries, which means we have 20 to 30 opportunities to interrupt that cycle of violence before it gets to fatal violence. And so this came directly out of the DOJ report. We've been working with our partners to shore up the response to non-fatal shootings, reduce the barriers to get it. So now if you dial 211 and press 2, you will not only get all the services that United Way offers, but you'll also get a gun violence intake that will be sent directly to Crime Victim Center for follow-up. Our second objective is to advance trauma-informed evidence-based violence prevention strategies. We know what works in other cities. We know what's worked here. We need to keep our eye on the prize and not be distracted by, again, apologize for the phrasing, the silver bullet that's going to come in and solve all of our violence prevention issues. We need to build out this suite of services, this suite of practices and policies to really make sure that we are building an evidence-based and community-informed system of violence prevention strategies. And the last is to activate communities to strengthen police legitimacy. We heard Dr. Motley talk about this. We heard Trey talk about this. We've worked on trying to have transparency in policing. Oftentimes we hear from residents that policing is kind of a black box, like decisions are made within the police department and folks don't know how or why these decisions are made. And so we're working with our partners on really trying to increase transparency and accountability for policing and really getting community involved in determining how they are policed. Next slide, please. So some of the activities we're doing to improve the safety of Black men and boys. Well, we are a convening table that brings together 60 member agencies and more than twice that, 130 to 150 agencies that participate on a regular basis. We also support folks that are implementing their projects. So I talked about the Gun Violence Response Network. Dial 211, press 2, tell them you were a gun violence victim, and you'll get access to services. We're also supporting program implementation. So Will's going to be talking about the co-responder model in the city of St. Louis. We are helping to support that. That's something, if any of you know Perry Johnson, who is retired from the city police department, he banged the drum for cops and clinicians for years and really supported the implementation of that here. We also support the city in implementing the 911 diversion program. I think Trey talked about that a little, that if you call 911 because you're having a mental health emergency and you're not in immediate danger to someone, you should be able to get a clinician response, not an armed police response. We also, our staff supports the implementation team or the steering committee for Cure Violence. A lot has been talked about with Cure Violence. The thing that I will just say on behalf of the steering committee unofficially is that it just fully launched in December of 2020. It's only in 3 neighborhoods. In each of those neighborhoods, it's only a 10-block catchment area. So we need to be patient to see how this is going to work out in St. Louis. There's evidence it works in other cities, but we need to give it time to work. Again, none of this is going to flip a switch and we will not have a violence problem. Another safe spaces for youth. And this really comes out of the Youth Violence Prevention Partnership Strategic Plan. What we heard when we had youth cafes is that youth don't feel like they have safe spaces in their neighborhood. Either the areas in their neighborhood that are safe or that should be safe aren't safe. So parks aren't safe. Or there are safe spaces, but there's barriers. It may be a transportation barrier. It may be that the rec center charges a fee that they can't afford. And so building capacity for our safe spaces to serve, especially 18 to 24-year-olds. It's important to know that 42% of non-fatal shootings in St. Louis, the victims were 25 and under. So if we address this small age gap, we can potentially have a huge impact on violence in St. Louis. So how do we build capacity for safe spaces for youth, whether it means late hours or 24 hours? And then in the absence of being able to do that during COVID, we've planned some youth pop-up events where kids who would otherwise be out and not having a place to go have a safe place to go with fun activities. And the last is our police legitimacy recommendations. On our website, I'll drop the link in the chat. We have a lot of recommendations on policing and on the contract that very much mirror some of the Forward Through Ferguson calls to action. So these are all things that we are very, very diligently working on. But the takeaway I want you to know is we believe that violence is preventable. We can't give in to the idea that we just have to live with the level of violence that it's at. Violence is preventable, and we have dozens and dozens of agencies and great people and community residents that are working on reducing violence and making St. Louis safer for young Black men and boys. If you want to get engaged, it's as simple as talking with HomeGrown, joining VPC, joining Forward Through Ferguson. We are all welcoming anyone who wants to work because we cannot have too many people working on violence prevention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica. Turn it over to you, Will. Thank you so much.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. I wanted to start with a little bit about myself and talk about the lens to which I bring this work, right? And so one of the things that's that it's a great conversation, but it's almost unfortunate to me that we're still having this conversation, because I grew up in New York City, and I was born in the 60s. I'm a little old guy, but I was born in the 60s, and I grew up in the projects in the Bronx. And I can tell you, just thinking and listening to Jamar and Michael and Jonathan and their personal stories, it just brings back a lot about my own personal stories, and thinking about how I grew up and what I saw. I could tell you one of the things that I thought about when Jamar was talking was, you know, Halloween is a great festive event in many neighborhoods. Kids put on their outfits and they go around trick-or-treating. When I grew up in the Bronx in the 70s, that wasn't the case. You know, people were putting razor blades in apples, people were egging people were shooting people on Halloween. So I didn't go out, and I still don't, you know, celebrate Halloween. I try to make sure my kids did. But, you know, you think about the things that happen in your life that sort of frame who you are and how you react to certain situations. You know, I remember my grandmother lived in Harlem, and going there, and, you know, drugs was rampant and violence was rampant, and just dealing with those challenges. I remember growing up in towards the end of towards my later teenage years, I lived in an all Italian community. My family was the only Black family in that area, just dealing with the racism that existed then. I remember being a young police officer and standing between Al Sharpton and the people who were fighting for racial justice, and the racist people who lived in Bensonhurst, and the N-word flying back and forth. So it's a lot of things that, you know, we think about pain. I think Michael talked about pain. You think about the pain that you endure. Today's my birthday, by the way. So this is my 54 years of thinking about the pain that I've lived through. And that doesn't always come through as pain, right? Sometimes things become normalized, which is not necessarily a good thing. But, you know, that pain comes from all of those things I described, but also then you start to think about my professional career. I was a police officer for 20 years with the New York City Police Department. And, you know, just thinking about community policing and walking a beat and engaging with people to this idea of listening, right? I think it was Jonathan that talked about listening, and we don't often listen enough to not only just young Black males, but to each other. And that was a lesson I learned about listening when I did that work. I then went into narcotics work, and I did some gang and violent crime work. But I think early on, and from my upbringing, I started to see people as who they are, not necessarily for what they were accused of doing. And I wound up going back to school at a point, and because I had a lot of questions, and growing up in the Bronx and growing up in the projects and growing up in certain areas, like, why did those areas stay the same even when crime got better? And so I went back and got a master's, and I started working in the planning part of the police department, the New York City Police Department. And it was great to be there because I got to think about and be there when policies were created and tried to have an impact on that. One of the things that we did, and I'm not sure who talked about it, but I ran a survey project for the New York City Police Department to look at how people felt about their interactions with police. And I know Dr. Motley talked about that in his research. And so that was important because we need to understand, as Dr. Joe even said, how do we represent the people? What are people thinking and feeling instead of just being driven by, I think Kevin talked about, you know, stats and arrest stats. You know, after I retired, I went into police training, and I trained police all across the country and internationally. And that gave me a feel for what are the best practices around, right? How are the people successful? What's common amongst the people who are successful in what they do? And so all of those things are sort of the lens I bring. I came here because Mayor Crewson brought me here to be a Fuse Fellow, to be a disruptor, to look at bail reform. And then she wound up asking me to stay on because she wanted me to continue that work and that disruption in this position that I have now as the director of the Mayor's Office of Children, Youth, and Families. You can go to the next slide. So as I approach this work, and even when I first came here, for me, it's all about healthy communities. A safe community is a healthy community, and I guess you could say a healthy community is a safe community. And I know there's a lot of discussions around public safety and reimagining public safety, and I'm all in for that. I think it needs to happen. Like I said, I was first a police officer in 1989, so I've been involved in policing in one form or another for over 30 years. And so when we start to think about safety and public safety, we want to think about public safety as ensuring communities, especially those that are historically marginalized, have the resources that they need to address critical social problems. And so that's the lens that I brought to the work. And if you can see by some of the stats here, and I don't want to repeat, it was a lot of great information given by the people who came before me on this call. But we can see that Black males and Black people are disproportionately, they suffer from the symptoms of unhealthy communities. So it's really important for me in my work, and I've worked with Michael on this and IHN, to really think about how do we make sure that people are, that the communities of people live in are healthy so that they can be healthy, so that we can achieve this goal of that Dr. Joe has set in 2040 of this economic upward mobility, right? Making sure that 100% of Black males have that. And so, you know, I just wanted to share some of these things that talk about trauma, talk about risk factors, and a lot of those things that are circular in that the trauma creates the risk factors, and or you can look at it, the risk factors lead to traumas. But it's no doubt, especially given the work that's been done, that exposures to violence, and Dr. Motley talked about his research on social media, you know, that exposure to violence has long-term effects on Black communities and Black males. You can go to the next slide. I just wanted to share this because it's not just about a moment in time, it's about a life course also, right? So on the left side of this, we can see we have this cycle of trauma where we have trauma, there's some effects of that trauma, it changes our behavior potentially, depending on how our society addresses how that behavior, it could lead to punishment, and then we start the cycle all over again. But we also see on the right side of this that, you know, it's important to think about life course. In addressing the challenges and the safety of Black men, we have to think about Black mothers. And so this isn't one approach. It's not one lane we have to move down. I believe in working across multiple lanes. And we see it starts with traumatic experiences that a mother can suffer, and once again, can lend itself all the way into adulthood, not only of the mother, but the children themselves. You can go to the next slide. So there has been some work Jessica talks about, and even when I came here, when I was first appointed to my position, I talked about, you know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of work that was already done. We need to lift up and identify work that was done. We don't need a more needs assessments. I'm sure Jessica just said this. We need action, right? And that's what my career has been about, and that's what my lens is here. What can we do? But when we look back on 2018, there was this needs assessment that was done that tells us what the needs and the gaps are. And all the speakers before me talked about this in one way or another. We need some crisis prevention. When I came here, one of the things that amazed me is that there was a lot of work being done in reentry. And depending on how you define reentry, you know, whatever point in the system that someone's engaged. But what it said to me was, we're just accepting the fact that Black males are going to be arrested or have to be arrested. Why is that the case? Why can't we do things to prevent that? Everybody's already talked about, you know, the access to services, right? Are there enough services? Are there not enough? How many people are already connected to services that get disconnected because of issues of legitimacy with the healthcare system? We talked about legitimacy with police, but what about in the healthcare system, right? So just these actions, these access and options for mental health and substance use services, the level of violence in the community. So as I said, I grew up in the Bronx in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Where I grew up in the Bronx looked like and had suffered from many of the challenges that are faced in North City and St. Louis. So that gives me optimism because I saw the Bronx change. I was there. I was at a front row seat to it. So I think one of the challenges, we often aren't optimistic enough. And I know Jessica was very passionate just before me about everybody getting involved in violence prevention. She's absolutely correct. But you also have to have a belief that things can change, because people can come together but not necessarily believe that things are going to get better. And so the community level of violence is something that needs to be addressed. Intergenerational interventions, as I said, we need to think about the life course, and we need to think about broad recovery needs. You can go to the next slide. So when I got here, one of the first things I did way back in January of 2019 was bring together a cross-sector group of people, because as Jessica said, you need people, you need as many people involved as you can. Michael, I would say his words and Detective Bentley's words are really about collaboration as the key. So I brought together leaders of the criminal justice agencies, social service agencies, behavioral health organizations, you know, community leaders, I brought them all together to say, how can we sort of reimagine? Forget about what is happening and what are the barriers. How can we reimagine the pretrial system? How can we just reimagine what is going on and how we can better serve the citizens of our city? And we started with, the first thing we started with was shared goals and values, because oftentimes people don't understand that they do have these shared goals and values. And then at the end of 6 months, we met twice a month for about 6 months. We came up with a framework upon which many of the things I'm going to talk about were conceptualized and built. And so as we look at this, what I would say is we built a crisis response network or strategies for the city of St. Louis out of much of the work that was being done or discussions that had already been had. But we looked at, us making sure that people have the appropriate response. I would say the thing that hangs over this slide mostly is I had the police department apply for and they received a BJA grant that looked at how they interact with people with mental health and co-occurring disorders. And that work really pushed the police department to be innovative and creative. So if you look on the left, we have call diversion, which is really basically if someone calls 911 and they are not feeling themselves and suffering from behavioral health crisis, we want to get them to the right level and an appropriate response. And so they can be transferred, and they would be transferred to the behavioral health response crisis line. They've been doing this for a while, so we wanted people to be able to do this that have been doing it and are trained to do it. If we look within the community, you always had crisis intervention teams or crisis intervention officers with the police department, but we also created these co-responder units. People have talked about cops and clinicians. When I came, I was asked to help move that to a place where it could be ready for implementation. As everyone said, Captain Johnson was a really strong advocate, as were other people. And so we built out these co-responding units where clinicians who work for behavioral health response ride with cops. And this will be citywide. They will be working between 10 in the morning and 11 at night. And they will responding mostly to de-escalate, help de-escalate situations, stabilize people, and connect them to care. We also, within those co-responding units, the city has received a grant from SAMHSA, which is an early diversion grant, which allows for just more targeted continuing care coordination for people who are identified to be a part of that grant. And who correspond to the criteria for the grant. And then in the jail, we have, and we started this in July of 2019, we started interviewing people who were arrested utilizing community health workers from Michael's organization, Integrated Health Network, to screen people who were being arrested to find out where they were in crisis so that we can connect them with the appropriate community-based services. And if they were going to go to a bail hearing, to make sure their defense attorney had that information to help a judge make a decision that was more appropriate to that person's needs. Then we have that line of people who connect people to the coordinated system of care that are connected to those interventions. And you'll see in the coordinated system of care, you'll see that red circle is a sobering center, which a behavioral health network is working on and came out of some work done by the Regional Health Commission. That is going to be a place where people who are suffering from inebriation due to alcohol or drugs can go and stabilize so that they don't have to be taken to the hospital or jail. So that's just a quick overview, and we can talk about it more in the breakout session. Next slide. Just in thinking about supporting initiatives, like I said, this can't happen just in a one point in time. These are some supporting initiatives that I'm working on through my office and working to lead some conversations around in the city that are important. The behavioral health initiative, the perinatal behavioral health initiative is a initiative of Generate Health that's looking at addressing and providing coordination and alignment of the various systems so that they could better support mothers, especially Black mothers. The Early Learning Nation is a National League of City initiative that's really looking at early childcare. If we don't start early on, I'm a strong supporter of education. If we don't start early on, making sure our kids have what they need to be successful in terms of reading and all the cognitive abilities that they need, then we're not going to be successful. So working with many early childhood organizations like Skip NV, We Power, to really look at that Out of school time and connecting kids to nature, I've convened the leaders of different child serving organizations to say, how can we make sure that all kids in every program in the city of St. Louis are receiving what they need to have so that their overall well-being is met and is important, instead of having one program do it well here and another one not do it well there. We started looking at the needs of post-secondary students through a National League of Cities cohort, where we're trying to focus on broadband, housing, food, and say, how can we make sure those people who are first generation, potentially like me, I was a first generation, and my family go to college, that they can successfully complete college, which then leads to those economic upward mobility. So convening the leaders of post-secondary institutions in the city. And then housing. Housing is the first and foremost issue for most people. If your housing isn't stable, then they don't care about anything else. So working with a bunch of collaborative partners and leading a discussion around a surge campaign, which is an innovative approach to housing, where you bring all the collective partners together so that you can have everything aligned, so that once you start to house people, they can be successful. So we have a goal of housing 100 people in 100 days. Hopefully that campaign will be starting this month in February. But once again, it's not just about one point in time, it's about a collaborative and cross-sectional approach. This is how, to me, you help Black males feel safe. Thank you for your time.
Will, we greatly appreciate you for sharing. In the meantime, I'm going to give a few directions for these breakout sessions. We'll speak for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then each group reporter, they will come back and present after the 20 to 25 minutes, the group findings, after which Dr. Joe will close us out. It's been a good day. And so we want to close us out and give us the energy to move forward in this important work. Awesome. I am so excited as people join us in to hear. I was doing a little breakout room session hopping. There's a lot of good conversation floating around. And so as people continue to come, we will hear from, in this order, Mike Whittier Jr., who will represent on behalf of the VPC breakout group, followed by Jonathan Pofus, and on Cops and Clinicians, and finish with Jamar Perry, who will represent the Forward Through Ferguson group. And I encourage, even though Jamar, Jonathan, and Mike will be leading this, if the facilitators or others want to offer opinion during that time, we welcome that. We give each of you 5 minutes to share and kind of culminate all these amazing points that have been collected. All right. So Mike, if you could go ahead and kick us off, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
So I think Jonathan was going to be presenting from, our presenters are Jonathan, Atia, and Jamar.
Jonathan, okay. Thank you, Alyssa.
Are we ready to go?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So again, I thank Dr. Sean Joe and Dr. Mike Jones for putting this together. Our breakout room got right to business. So Brother Wilford had like a series of questions that for our breakout room to address. So the first question was, what should officers and clinicians be thinking about as they prepare to support these neighborhoods? So we got feedback from Brother Reginald Slaughter of the Fathers and Family Support Center. He gave this anecdote and experience in his story around the St. Louis Metropolitan, the police department, and himself collaborating on the basketball league. And that basketball league, he expressed, was like a symptom of community and police coming together to just increase familiarity between the institution and residents, as a positive thing that he sees. In this, Cops and Clinicians kind of put him in the idea of that. Brother Sean, Dr. Sean Joe did ask, how do you address equity and power in the midst of all that? And then Brother Wilford chimed in saying you have to be deliberate on training and communicate about responsibilities between the clinicians and the cops while they're out there. But you know, that was a piece of that. Additionally, we got some feedback on just monitoring for that program. Brother Wilford also said that, you know, there are going to be regular meetings happening. There are going to be different a data strategist hired to make sure that all the data is just kept track of, so evaluation can happen, improvements can be made based on that. Brother Dennis Boyd shared that there should be mandated therapy because cops do go, everybody has a job to do, and if cops are experiencing vicarious trauma or wherever the case may be, we don't want that to show up in work in a way that is negative and counterproductive. And Brother Wilford responded that he shared some personal pieces about his ex-wife and a partner he had on the force who experienced some mental health things that led to some things. And so he agreed that, the cops won't be training cops on therapy or nothing like that. That'll probably be outsourced as well. And then we kind of transitioned to what, will community members be receptive to this program? What will they need in order to feel comfortable? Brother Robert said, there should be community input on the situation to help it, as a part of the process when we're thinking about implementing a program like this. We don't just want to implement it and it just be what it is without input from the residents. Brother Wilford shared that, in partnership with Deaconess, and there was that 6-month-long period that he shared in his presentation where community were involved and there was feedback, and hopefully throughout the process, there'll continue to be feedback to help adjust and tweak what's going on. In terms of what have we failed to consider so far, just some general comments. Brother Jerry Thompson shared that he arrived in St. Louis just 2 weeks prior to Mike Brown. That was his introduction to the community. And he talked about how there needs to be a way to share information and share what's on the news. So it's not just sound bites people are getting. 30-second soundbite clips. Brother Wilford shared that he'll do like a 30-minute presentation and only 30 seconds are on the news. And so just, minimizing that gap. And Sister Darius shared that, similar to the basketball and cops kind of community program that was going on that Brother Shawter talked about. She said there needs to be more positive interactions with law enforcement outside of just seeing that badge and stuff like that. And she talked about her experience in 2018 with an officer who was, building relationships with young people. So when, they get pulled over, to get arrested, it's more of a familiar face. And then in terms of scale for the program, Dr. Joe shared with Brother Wilford about how in St. Louis, because of the height of violence that we got going on here, it's not really, some cities are implementing models that don't require police. But he would recommend at least we start with baby steps in terms of making sure that we have enough. That given the amount of clinicians that we have to cover the area, that we transition from what is currently there to like more 24-hour model, and hopefully folks more use that crisis line more. But those are just some like real skimmed down, reports of what was spoken on. I'm gonna share in the chat just some notes I took to that effect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Appreciate you sharing. And next we will hear from Tia Thurman.
Thank you for everyone who participated in the breakout group with the Violence Prevention Commission, and especially thank you to Jessica for facilitating the conversation. We started off with a question about how can we be more responsive to young Black males, and how do we get them to use the gun violence network that's built off of the United Way 211 system. However, the group members, their response was, this is a bigger conversation. It feels like we're coming into the middle of a conversation. The precursor to this conversation is about school, the intersection of violence, dropout rates, and incarceration rates. And then we got a little deeper and we were like, the precursor to that conversation is really about the value we ascribe to the lives of Black men, and that our society has normalized the dehumanizing of Black boys and Black men. And so then it's very difficult to identify any safe spaces for young Black men or Black males. There are no safe spaces, and that we really need to invest in a trusting environment. Black males need healthy attachments to adults who care for them, and we need to invest in mental and emotional health that focus on African-centered healing, kind of taken from positive psychology and moving away from a deficit model to a strength-based model. There's also the conversation that the approach we're talking about right here is very programmatic, very individual, and it places the onus and the responsibility on individuals when we need to be looking at the entire system, a system that creates racial inequity and disparities. And therefore, no matter how much an individual may do, no matter how much a family or a young man may do, no matter how much help and support they may get, this is a systematic challenge and problem, and the interventions lie at the system level, and we need to focus there. The other thing we asked was, how can we best engage our partners to expand the concept of safety as a public health issue, and it's not just a policing challenge or policing issue. Once again, we had members of the conversation such as like Kenneth Wood and Amy Hunter spoke up. Amy said, we need to imagine another context for this. That means we need a radical conversation, again, about the value we ascribe to the lives of Black men, like shifting, like what Dr. Joe said in the beginning, the shift from the way we even view Black men, the truth telling and reconciliation that needs to happen at the systems level around systems that have created the outcomes, that have over-disciplined, that have over-incarcerated young Black men. So we need truth-telling and healing. The conversation was, if white boys were being incarcerated at such an alarming rate, what will we do? How do we change this lens? They also pointed out that we need people with privilege, access, and resources to be in this fight. So in terms of partnership and in terms of expanding the concept of safety, and I want to say also people, you know, in position of power. I don't know if we said that. We need to see investing in Black males as an asset for the region, get the media involved, do some capacity building for communities to lead their own violence prevention plans. In the meantime, amplify the leadership and the work of community residents who are doing this. And then there was one radical idea. I don't know if it's even so radical, man. But, you know, how about we have like 7 major universities in our region. And so get all the universities to guarantee opportunities for students from targeted zip codes, from everything from admission and preparation to financial aid and retention, and to support their success. So that was one of the very specific interventions that was offered up and one of the ideas. Thank you to the group, and I will turn off my mic.
Thank you so much, Atia. And last but certainly not least, Brother Jamar.
Okay, I appreciate that. Certainly not least. I appreciate that. So first of all, I'd like to thank Trayvon Latimer from Ford through Ferguson for facilitating. We first opened up to the 24 people that was in the room, just anything they may want to address. The one thing Don Logue said was the political environment, the tough on crime policies which are taking place locally and throughout the state and even nationally. Bob Fox talked about the gun problems, and if there were no guns, there would be, you know, less violence, especially less death. The first question that we opened up was, when do you feel safe? Some of the things that we heard were at home, at work, and someone said the fear factor is missing. There is no sense of village. I talked about an instance what happened to them where they were robbed in front of their home, how that wouldn't have happened, you know, at one point in time. Someone else said they feel safe when they're close to people they love. And one thing I heard also was the duality of being Black. Someone used their experience as a police officer to talk about what that was like during Ferguson, in terms of being a Black police officer and also being a Black man, and the duality of that. The next question that we talked about was the main barriers to not feeling safe. What I heard was unfamiliarity, the unknown, and segregation in St. Louis and how that's an issue. We also spoke about neighborhood trauma, and we spent a decent amount of time talking about being proactive versus reactive, especially with the way we deal with our youth in the city. And we also spoke about meeting kids where they are in terms of physical space and being in the communities in which they are, where these things are taking place. One thing I've heard throughout all of these things were zip codes, how important they are. And we also spoke about the level of violence. Violence begets violence is what we is one thing I heard. And yeah, that was the overall sentiments of what we spoke about.
All right. Thank you so much, Jamar, for representing. And so before I turn it over to Dr. Joe for final remarks, I do want to make mention that our survey is in the chat. So if you could please, before you exit, fill out that survey so you can let us know some feedback on how this overall engagement went. Dr. Joe?
No, again, we wanted to open up, thank you all the groups for reporting back out. We just wanted to open the floor up for others who might have questions about these different initiatives. And if you wanted to weigh in, since you are in these discussion groups. So we still have time for you to ask questions of our primary presenters of the different initiatives. And there are others. So we know there are other initiatives, but again, we're only able to feature these 3 at the moment. So the floor is open to the broader audience. Use the chat, or Mike and Alyssa and others will help to unmute so we could take the next 5 minutes or so for any additional comments or questions related to these initiatives.
I got a comment. I need to really put this out here. I've been kind of bothered all weekend long, and I'm just being honest. The movie American Skin has really kind of like put me in a place when I saw it that I didn't really feel comfortable with. And I wish that everybody else would take an opportunity to look at that. And because of who I am as an African-American in my life and how I've changed my life and deal with things, it kind of like put me in a place that I was really uncomfortable with and tempted as an African-American. Man, it just put me somewhere that I really had to go sit still and pray for a minute. So if you get an opportunity, I just wanted to share that with everybody because that's just who I am as a person, as a man, as a God-fearing person. That, man, it just did something to me. And we did discuss just seeing video violence on African Americans. So I think that's what I got out of this piece that kind of brought me into a more peace about that film. Thank you.
Sean, Dr. Joe, can I say something?
The floor is open at this point in time. Go right ahead.
So I just wanted to say something. So the work that Jessica and I'm doing is very important with that 911, the shooting, the 211 gun into violence intake. But I do think, and I've talked about this a lot, this is one of the reasons why I was really passionate about getting this call diversion co-responder done. We need more in-person responses to people with the level of trauma that exists in the community here. And it's not just to meet people at that moment in time to say, hey, I got some resources for you. But we don't, in my opinion, we don't wrap our arms around people enough who are having just multiple incidents of trauma in their community, whether it's directly or indirectly suffered. I would say it's about centering the individual in these responses and whatever strategies that are developed. Someone else made the point, I think it was Atia, we can't have this, people have to respond to systems. Systems should be responding to people. And so a lot of the work that I'm involved in, that's what we're trying to move towards. And then the last thing I would say is I would think smaller than zip codes, because the zip codes here are so big. If you think about equity, if you take all the census tracts in a zip code, and if you just look at a zip code, maybe you're clustering your engagement in one part of a zip code, but people in other parts aren't either responding or engaged. And so I would say you really need to get more granular than zip code data when you start to look into responses. And that's what I'm trying to start doing with the work that I'm involved in.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? And then we'll.
Yeah, this is Jerry Thompson. My question is, and I really truly appreciate the invite to be able to be part of this town hall. I learned a ton that I didn't know. My question is, aside from the invite and being able to participate in this town hall, is there a more specific ask of the attendees today?
And Mr. Thompson, I will get to that in this closing. I really appreciate that. Again, we just met, folks. I didn't ask him to say that. there is, and I just want to wait for a second to see if there's any other comments, questions, and I'll get right to your comment, Mr. Thompson. Okay. So let me just take this liberty at this time. First of all, to thank all of you for joining in today's town hall. I want to thank our partner, the Clark Fox Policy Institute, Atia Thurman, for joining with us to help to make this an incredible town hall. I think it was a very focused dialogue. I want to thank again the entire team, of course. Alyssa Finner and the countless energy and hours, our partners, again, with the Violence Prevention Commission, with Jessica Myers, for all our panelists, Michael Whittier, again, Jamar Perry, Trayvon Lattimore, forward through Ferguson, Will Pickney, and all those who've been helping, Dennis, Robert Motley, Dr. Motley now, I have to, call him as he reminds me, Jonathan, everyone else. Again, if I miss anyone, it's just really not of heart, but of aging mind. So please forgive me for that, and thank you all for attending. So I think this is it. So again, we want to thank you all. Our point of today's conversation and our main ask is that we really center the discussion around Black males, center it around their personal safety and what can we do to spread the word and spread the focus that if we center around Black males' personal safety, we'll be able to get at a lot of the root issues, not all, but a lot of the root issues that we're dealing with in St. Louis, and put the city and put the region in a better, not only economic, but also physical and mentally, and probably spiritually well-being position. And to make us much more competitive, that we can advance this big grand challenge that we have, which is to ensure that Black males, at least in St. Louis City and County, are much better off than Black males in any other region. I care about the nation as a whole, but for right now, this is one of those things we have to be able to show that we can organize ourselves to achieve these sort of outcomes. And that's really what's on the table. That's what Homegrown really meant, is to have a table where we're strategically asking this question around Black males' economic and as well as their general well-being. There needs to be, as you know, these are complex issues and it takes time, and you must have the right spaces. When we want to have conversations about the business and economic health of St. Louis, we have spaces for that. We have tables, we have groups and initiatives and organizations, but we needed something centered around this population, and that's why many came together to create something called Homegrown and growing our own strategy. So here's the ask going forward. One, Homegrown and its partners, we're hoping that we can engage you in moving ahead to make sure we have an accountable policing resident survey. This idea of asking residents, understanding their perception of safety, and it could be a part of anything else. So I'm hoping that our partners that presented today, forward through Ferguson, the Violence Prevention Commission, the Mayor's Office, others, that we can really launch this and figure out how to institutionalize this. It doesn't solve everything, but it gives us the type of information, and it tells residents that how they're feeling actually matters, and that can be lifted up. So we need to regularly do that. So we're hoping that we can lay out some planning to see how we can do that. You have a university partner that's much as capable of doing that, and others we could bring to the table, but this needs to be done and institutionalized, and I think we can do that. Second, we talked a lot about the policy changes. I heard it in all the breakouts. How can we make some policy changes occur at the law enforcement level that they are rewarding policing that improves the residents' sense of personal safety? Again, these are some of the things that the sergeant mentioned, and I'm blocking right now. I want to make sure I get his name totally correct. Again, I want to thank.
You're on mute.
You're on mute. Something muted me. I don't know what it was. If they have the right reward system centered around and policies at the law enforcement agency level, that policing strategies that would reduce residents' fear and help would be very helpful. Policing strategies that involve canvassing by local officers to understand the sources of residents' fear, and then targeting their strategies and working with community, it builds trust on all sides, because you're telling people there's a lot we can do. I can't solve all your poverty right now, but in terms of public safety, this is my job and I want to be good at it. And we have to move past this kind of got you sort of framework, meaning it's not great right now. No matter if crime numbers reduce for a variety of reasons, people's sense of personal safety don't always match that reduction. And again, we cannot ignore this issue. And I think if we stay laser focused on this, other things will begin to unfold. So I just really, that's the takeaway. And if anyone wants to be part of this work, we're just going to try to figure out where best to position this work. Because at Homegrown, we feel this should be institutionalized at the system level. And we want to work with our partners to do that. And and this is one of many strategies that Homegrown is focused on, as I showed you in those 7 pillars. And we're looking for partners. So folks, I say, get involved with the organizations and initiatives that you saw today. Take the step just to plug yourself in, or your company in, or your organizations in, or your time in. And again, it doesn't solve everything, but if we follow this all the way to the end, then we know we don't have to come back to this issue if we follow it all the way through. And then there'll be other tables for you to go really deep in. So I heard a lot here. So COPS and practitioners models should be expanded, not just for the clinical mental health, but I'm hearing to go back to some of the others that have been tried, like youth development. So go broad in that range. And remember, if you ever get lost in this conversation, just ask the simple question. How are the things that we're doing effectively improving Black males' sense of personal safety? If we keep asking that question, then we will be able to stay focused and put the effort in to ensure that that's an outcome. And then we not only would reap the rewards, but those males and their families and others will reap the rewards. So with that, that's my closing. I appreciate this conversation, and I'm looking forward to continue to do the work that will help us move forward for an accountable policing framework that advances Black male personal safety. So with that, I say thank you. Thank you to the team. Again, if I forgot anyone, I know this is a credible amount of work, and for all those who attended, and look forward to continue to work with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Joe. Again, on behalf of Dr. Joe, Tina Thurman, and the team, we really appreciate everybody for joining us. Enjoy some music and networking. Thank you.
So thank you all.
Thank you all. Enjoy your day. Thanks again for attending.